Okay, so welcome back. Good to see everyone. And again, a happy Pesach Sheni. We're not going to talk about Pesach Sheni tonight, but it is a special day. And as we usually do for Avodas HaParsha, we're going to take one small thing from the Parsha and try and see how it affects our Avodah. Now, this Parsha, Parshas Behar, has a very unique pasuk, and there are a lot of different takes on this pasuk. So I obviously bit off more than I could chew, as usual. Okay, so we'll see how many of them we touch on. I'll try to at least give pointers to the ones we can't go into so much. And the pasuk is the following. Shemitah, okay, that's the central topic in the beginning of Parshas Behar. And people are going to not work their fields in the 7th year. Okay, so during the 7th year, you have food from the 6th year, okay? That's how agriculture works, right? The harvest comes toward the end of the year. It gives you what to eat at the end of the 6th year, let's say. Throughout the 7th year, you're eating from the 6th year. The problem comes in the 8th year. If during the 7th year, right, you're not going to be planting, you're not going to be doing, right? And so what are you going to eat? So here the Torah brings that question. It tells us, V'chi tamru, okay, a very unique type of pasuk. Perakafei pasuk chaf. V'chi tamru, and when or if, okay, there are many meanings to the word ki. Ki can be when, if, asher. Ma nochal b'shana hashvis. What are we going to eat in the Shana Shvis? Now again, the Mefarshim say the problem is not the Shana Shvis. Really, the pasuk, the Ramban and Rav Hirsch also explains like this. It's kind of v'chi tamru b'shana hashvis, and when you'll say in the 7th year, looking ahead to the 8th, right? Ma nochal, what are we going to eat? Hein lo nizra v'lo ne'asov et tuaseinu. We're not going to plant, not going to sow, so therefore we're not going to be able to collect. So what are we going to do? So Hashem says, "V'tzivisi es birchosi lochem b'shana hashishis," a very strange turn of phrase. I will command my bracha to you in the 6th year. V'asos es hatvua l'shlosh hashanim, and it will make tvua for 3 years, meaning for the end of the 6th, for the 7th, and for the 8th. Okay, it can get even more complicated when the Yovel comes. Okay, but that's already a lot. So the questions here are the following. And this is a famous piece in the Noam Elimelech, one of the few places where Elimelech Mlizenz quotes his brother Rav Zusha. Okay, I saw somebody who said that he hints to his brother, they were very close, he hints to his brother in the very title, Noam Elimelech, Noam, pleasant or sweet, and his brother's name was Zusha, Ziz, sweet. Okay, so that was there. But here he quotes him, and this is quoted all over, and it opens up a lot of thought, and people approach it in different ways. So he brings B'Shem Achi HaChosid HaMefursam, says Rebbe Elimelech, in the name of my brother, the famous Chosid Rav Zusha. Yesh L'Dakdik, says we have to pay attention to the nuances here in the pasuk. HaTorah Yotzta B'chan Midarka. The Torah here left its usual way of doing things. Shederach HaKra Lichtov Eze Yitur Loshon B'Pasuk. The way the Torah is that if it's addressing an implied question, or some type of question, there'll be an extra word in the pasuk, right? Afilu osacha, sometimes even an extra letter, and we're going to say, why did the Torah do that? Because if you'll ask so-and-so, it's addressing that question. And with that, it's mitaritz all these kushyas. You don't write the kushya in the Torah, right? You don't keep writing these different things, and if you'll say this, right, you'll say, by Pesach we have v'hoyaki sholcha bincha, but that's, laying out the terms of how we do Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim with questions and answers. But here he says, why didn't Hashem just write, I will command my bracha in the 6th year, you'll have plenty, and then we know the answer to the question. We don't even have to ask the question. Why does the Torah say, and when you will ask this question, and then V'tzivisi es birchosi is also a very strange expression. I will command my bracha. Why don't you just say, Uverachti es hashana hashishis. I will bless it. I will command my bracha. So Rav Zusha explains in the following way. He says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, when he created the world, he created it with what he calls tzinoros moshchim shefa. Pipelines of shefa. Okay, let's just take a second for a beautiful thought about this word shefa. Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, who was a tremendous knowledge and insight in Lashon HaKodesh, right? So he said the following. He was addressing the following question. He said many parents make the mistake in thinking that they're supposed to be mechanchim, right? Educators. He says, how can that be? Meaning, to be an educator, that's a specific skill set that a person has to have. And even if a person has a skill set to be an educator, a person who's good at educating 6-year-olds is not necessarily good at educating 15-year-olds, right? And you're going to get all these different things with your kids. How can the Torah expect every set of parents to be mechanchim? He says you're not, right? What you're expected to be is mashpi'im, shefa. Okay, now how does the word shefa work? He said the word shefa, which often translates as abundance that comes down from above, is related to the Hebrew word shipua, which means a slant. Okay, if you imagine a slanted roof. If you put a ball on the top of a slanted roof, it rolls down very naturally. You don't have to push it, you don't have to throw it, it just flows down naturally from above. He says parents are meant to be able to influence their children. Hashpa'ah we call influence, meaning it kind of overflows from their own excitement, from their own interests, from their own behavior. That's what parents are expected to do. The education leave to educators. If you can educate, for sure, do what you can, but that weight is not on you in all those ways. But hashpa'ah, yes. My example for this is always the following. A kid growing up in America, let's say, you never hear a mother and father sitting down and having this discussion, Shlomi's 10 years old and he doesn't seem to care about baseball at all or understand it. Maybe we should hire a tutor, and you hire a tutor to teach him. There's the American League, the National League, there's a double play, there's all these things, and he'll get tests. It doesn't happen that way. How does Shlomi get excited about baseball? Because he sees his father like sitting on the edge of his seat. He goes like, double play. What's a double play? And he explains to him, and he says, yes, who's that? He said, he's got a streak, his, batting average is 357. What's a batting average? And so he's got it all. It all flows into there, right? And that's the idea of shefa. So here, in terms of what we're talking about, let's reset now to the world of food and produce in the fields. It says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu set up the world with flowing shefa. Okay, the Chazal say, "Man de yoiv chaya yoiv mezone." HaKadosh Baruch Hu created living things, so He created their food. It's one of the great wonders of the world when we say, "Hazon hasolam kulu b'chein v'chesed u'v'rachamim." Right? If you look at some National Geographics, how every little creature has its particular thing that it eats. Right? There's like some bird that rides on the head of rhinoceroses and eats these little, bugs that end up nesting in the ears of the rhinoceros or something like that. It's a pele. And that's what finds favor in their eyes. That's what they like. That's what's there. HaKadosh Baruch Hu created that. In the previous year, when we spoke about ribis, we brought that idea that really everything in the world is supposed to be a flowing source of bracha. So here, when the person asks, what are we going to eat? So he says then, he doesn't have that bitochen in Hashem, that Hashem gives this sustenance. So then he says you cause an interruption in that flow from above. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu has to restart. Vitzivisias birchosi. Right? Because if you don't ask that question, so then it keeps going. But when you ask the question, suddenly it stops. And there has to be this reset. Right? And every time something restarts, can be a little tricky. Your file gets opened, right? The bureaucrats start looking at it, and things are like that. So says Rav Zusha. And so the way he's approaching it is that this question is not a good question to ask, right? They should have just kind of kept going, feeling that Hashem would give it. Once the question is asked, Hashem will take care of you, but realize that it's not in the best way possible. Okay, now let's see how the different tzaddikim, mefarshim, examined Rav Zusha's question. Rav Leibel Eiger, he said, he explained it this way. He said, did Rav Zusha really mean that people are going to say, how are we going to eat? Meaning, it's HaKadosh Baruch Hu here who tells you to keep the Shemitah. Do you think he didn't think about that? Right? You're sitting there in the meeting with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he lays out the flow chart, right, about Shemitah, does the little PowerPoint presentation, and he questions, how are we going to eat? Right? And that thing. If he told you, don't sow, do you think he's trying to kill you with a mitzvah? That doesn't make sense. So what is the question? Said Rav Leibel Eiger, he said, the question is, we might not have the schus, we might not have the merit for Hashem to miraculously support us during that time when we're not sowing. In other words, okay, for a person to get his regular food through the regular system, I plant in my field, we know that's all from Hashem, but okay, at least that's regular. But to somehow have food for 3 years without planting, maybe we won't have that, maybe our descendants won't have that schus, what's going to be? Okay, so Rav Henoch says, and this he's reading into Rav Zusha's thing, that's also an improper question. Sounds like a very frum question. Oh Hashem, we may not be worthy of it. He says, you know what the mistake is? He says, you think that every day in a regular year you get your food because you're worthy? You think that's it? You think that when you get your sandwich, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, this man in Midas Hadin, in the meat of judgment, deserves his peanut butter and jelly sandwich, right? Do you really think so? B'chein b'chesed v'rachamim. Every day you're getting with mercy. You're constantly getting with mercy. That's the mistake that the person's making, right? It's a grave mistake. Here at Shemitah is not the time to look back and say, okay, you've been taking care of me, but that's because I deserved it. Now, what am I going to do? I'm taking it to another level. I don't know if I have the schus to deserve this. It's going to be miraculous. So he says the mistake is, and then you start messing with the pipelines of Shefa. If you start thinking that the Shefa you get is because you deserve it, that's the problem. And that's why a person always asks Hashem for matnas chinam, right? You ask Hashem because He loves us, because He can give to us, because He cares. You don't start trying to wheel and deal with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, right? Cashing in your chips. The example, I think we mentioned last week, Moshe Rabbeinu, V'eschanon. Nobody had more chips than Moshe Rabbeinu. He wanted to go into Eretz Yisrael. The word V'eschanon, Chazal said he asked for matnas chinam. He asked for a free gift. I'm just asking because. Okay, along with that, there's a famous teaching in the Maggid of Mezrich that it is really important for where we go with our mind. Don't put your mind into bad places, meaning don't start planning out how Hashem is going to punish you. Right? Don't start saying, oh Hashem, because I'm not worthy, so then you're probably not going to let me pass this test or get that raise or things like this. That again is this thinking that everything you have until now is quid pro quo because you've earned it. Don't think that. Think only good things, because Hashem has given you good things till now that you didn't deserve, and He can still give you good things that you didn't deserve. If you did something wrong, do tshuva, but don't start, right, planning out how Hashem is going to limit you and what He's going to do. Okay, so that is the way Reb Henoch of Alexander reads this. The Sfas Emes approaches it also. He says that people who come and they ask, what are we going to eat? Right? So those people, again, are saying, right, there's nature and there's a nes. There's nature and there's a miracle. And they're asking, how are you going to do this miracle for us that we'll be able to eat without planting for 3 years? And their mistake is not realizing that nature is a miracle. Nature is the biggest of Hashem's miracles, right? And because of that, he says, you know what? A person who doesn't realize that nature is a miracle, you're right, he doesn't merit something miraculous, but Hashem says, I have another system to take care of you. It's called bracha. V'tzivisi es birchasi. Bracha isn't a nes, it's not a miracle. It's somewhat tied into this world. It's not going to be like mun coming down from heaven, but your fields are going to do amazingly good. Okay, that's what he says over there. Another approach, okay, so that's people kind of explaining Rav Zusha's approach, that there's a problem with this question and how it's being responded to. But Torah has 70 different facets, and there are others who see this as a positive thing, right? That they're supposed to ask this question. Rav Moshe of Kozhnitz, the son of Rav Yisrael of Kozhnitz, the Kozhnitzer Maggid, he says, this is exactly what you're supposed to be doing, right? In other words, HaKadosh Baruch Hu sets it up. He says, okay, here's the mitzvah of Shemitah. You're not going to be able to work your fields in the 7th year. And he's like going, no. Say, Hashem, how are we going to survive, right? How are we going to be sustained? Good. Now v'tzivisi of birchasi. Now you get the bracha. Where do we learn that pattern from? From the very beginning of creation. It says, right, the way Rashi explains the Psukim in Bereshis, that, right, all the plants were ready by the edge of the ground to come out, but they didn't come out yet because Hashem didn't bring rain. Why? Because there wasn't an Adam who would be able to appreciate and be makir tova to what was there, to daven for the rain and to daven for the plants to come. Okay, so therefore this bracha is here. It's just waiting for you to do this. So it's a positive thing. Hashem's setting it up, and this fits in with many things we have. The Medrash Tanchuma has a mashal for tefillah. Right? It's a cute mashal. It says that there was once a king, and the king is walking down the street, and he hears a young woman going, "Help, help!" And he runs over. He sees that there are some ruffians, right, trying to kidnap this young woman who looks very regal. So he takes out his sword and he fights them off, and she says, "Thank you very much." Then the king starts to think, that was a very fine royal type of woman. Maybe she would like to go out with me. So he sends a letter. It's ignored. He sends a messenger. Door slammed in his face. He says, "But I wanted to talk to her more. I want her to be my queen." So he hires some ruffians. Next time she goes for a walk, he has them cry. She goes, "Help, help, help." And now the discussion started. So he says, sometimes the situation HaKadosh Baruch Hu puts you in is to generate that, because tefillah is connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Tefillah is linking that which is going to be coming. HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants it to come through that question. Okay, it's not a negative question in this approach. It's a positive question. There's a cute story about the Baal Shem Tov. Right, the Baal Shem Tov used to go off in his wagon with the Hasidim, right, to all sorts of mysterious missions. So once in the middle of the winter, he tells some of the Hasidim, okay, who wants to go on an outing? They pack into the wagon, they go riding into the woods. And then at some clearing in the middle of the woods, there's a little house with smoke coming out of the chimney, and the wagon stops there. A man, a Jewish-looking man, comes running out of the house. He says, "Orchim, guests, I so much love guests. I never get guests in the winter because I live here in the woods. Come in." And they're coming in, and he starts asking, "Where you from?" And the Baal Shem Tov says, "Well, maybe we could just have something to eat and drink. We're very tired." 100%, and he makes them a lovely meal, and they daven mincha, right, and they daven ma'ariv, and he makes them a supper, and he gives them places to sleep. Next day they get up, they daven, he makes them a lovely breakfast, right, they learn Torah, lunch, right, etc., etc. This goes on for a couple of days. His wife comes over to him, into the Baal Bayis. He says, "We're running out of food." Right? It's like these guys, it's like a minion of guys. Like, it's not. He said, so go buy some more. She said, "Yeah, I already bought some more. We're kind of running out of money." He says, I don't know, we'll sell some of our stuff. Okay, so she takes some things into the marketplace, she sells. And then one morning, they have breakfast. The Baal Shem Tov gives a clap on the table. He says, "Enough." And they all file out, say thank you very much to him. And they go. And the man is like walking out with them. He says, "Tell me, I never caught where you're from." He said, "We're from Mezbush." He says, "Really? I heard that there's this very big tzaddik there, the Baal Shem Tov. Do you know him?" The Baal Shem Tov said, "The one you've wanted to see, you've already seen." And he went riding off. Okay, that was strange. Meanwhile, he hears crying from the house. He comes in. He asks his wife, "What's with the kids?" She said, "They're starving." He says, "So give him breakfast." He says, "No food." He says, "Buy some." "No money." "Sell something." "Look around you. Nothing here." Right? Right? They ate us out of house and home. You gave them absolutely everything. What are we going to do? So then there's a knock on the door. And it's a Russian peasant who lives kind of near them. We'll call him Ivan, like you do in all these stories. And Ivan comes in, and Ivan often would stop by for piece of cake and a glass of vodka or something. So the man says, "Ivan, bad time now to come over because we're kind of busy starving, So, and Ivan said, no, I have something very important to talk to you about." "Okay, what is it?" He says, "You know how my daughter married that dog of a son-in-law that I hate?" He says, "Yes, you tell me often." He says, "Well, I don't want them to have any of my money when I die." He says, "Okay." He says, "I want you to have it." He says, "Okay, very nice." But Ivan says, "You see, it's not just a little bit of money. I have treasure that I've hidden in the woods." And he thinks Ivan is already this, but Ivan schleps him out, digs under a tree, shows him the treasure. Anyway, as the story would go, a few days later, Ivan's liver finally gets cirrhosis or whatever, and he's gone, and this man digs up the treasure, and he's now a wealthy man. So his head is spinning. He says, I was minding my own business in my little cottage in the winter. Comes the Baal Shem Tov with this minion of guys who eat me out of house and home, right? And then suddenly Ivan comes and does this. I have to figure out what's happening. So he travels to Mezbush. Comes into the Baal Shem Tov. He greets him warmly. He says, Rebbe, what was that all about? He says, I saw in Shamayim that there was a gzera that you were supposed to get wealth. But the problem was you never really davened strongly from the bottom of your heart for parnasa. So I basically brought over some hungry Hasidim, and we got to the point that you really had to daven for parnasa, and then the gate was open. You were able to get that wealth that was on you. So that's kind of similar to the way he's explaining this v'chi tomru. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I'm putting you into this Shemitah situation. Why? Because I want you to daven. And when you daven v'tzivisi es birchosi, there's going to be a great bracha which is coming. Okay.
So what we will eat is really the davening.
Correct. That's it's a question, but it's addressed to Hashem because you know that He's the source of the answer. Right? So too Rav Leibel Eiger explains, but I want to jump into now a very different approach, also viewing it as positive, but a very interesting one, leading up to Shavuos, especially because Shavuos we have to realize the Torah calls Chag HaBikurim, about the fruits of Eretz Yisrael. Okay? And it was a very big thing when you learn the Mishnayos and Bikurim. You see, it was great publicity and joy when they brought the Bikurim up to Yerushalayim. Okay, so here's how the Bas Ayin explains it. The Bas Ayin, Reb Dov Avrich, who moved to Tzvas, so he says the following. He says, people are going to ask, first of all, he said, let's look at eating in general. Why did Hashem create us that we have to eat and drink? Why couldn't we just keep going? Okay, so he says, especially because eating and drinking is challenging, especially with the entire way we get to eat and drink. We have to do business, we have to earn money, we have to get food, we have to eat and drink. We can end up doing many averas in that way. If HaKadosh Baruch Hu just set us up with an eternal battery, right, we'd probably be better off in a world like that. He says, no. He says the kavanah of HaKadosh Baruch Hu was that eating is going to connect us to Him. Okay? That very cycle in which we don't have food, we get food, we appreciate the food, and it's there. But there's eating and eating. He says the ultimate eating as it was meant to be in the world, was what he calls the bechina of Eretz Yisrael. To eat in the way of the fruits of Eretz Yisrael. He explains. Because the Peros Eretz Yisrael, Yeshlem Kedusha Kol Kach, the Peros of Eretz Yisrael have such Kedusha. Right? Kshe'adam ochel mi Peros Eretz Yisrael, when someone eats from the fruits of Eretz Yisrael, there are Shiva minim, the seven species Shnishtabcha Eretz Yisrael, and you eat them as they should be eaten. He says you awaken the 7 midos. Right? Now, many people when they're doing Sfiras HaOmer, they talk about those midos at the end. They talk about Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes. So years ago, I heard a series of shiurim from Moshe Shapiro Zatzal, and feel bad I can't find my notes. It was in Perek HaRoeh, the Perek in Brachos, which talks about dreams, and a lot of the dreams dealt with seeing this fruit and that fruit in your dream. And they were the fruits, the 7 species of Eretz Yisrael, and he explained, right, the 7 species, each one, by its very nature, you can see how it lines up to a particular midah. That chita lines up to chesed, and sa'ara, the barley, to gvura, etc. Okay, so it's not just, especially when people look, some of those minim aren't so exciting, right? Barley, right? It's not such an exciting form of produce, but each one has this power. And he says, this is the type of eating that the world was created for. That by our eating, we will awaken midos, attributes, and bring these things into the world. Okay? Now he says, but if you can't have, and the way in which we're able to do it, the opportunity is for Am Yisrael to be able to do it with the fruits of Eretz Yisrael. The Shivas Haminim, but not just. We do give kavod to grapes that are grown in California, and we will say the bracha of Al HaPeros instead of Bari Nefashos, but there's an extra level when those fruits are actually fruits of Eretz Yisrael. He says, and without it, it's very hard to connect to the Kedusha and to accomplish what we're supposed to do spiritually by our eating. It says, this is what the Pasuk says, V'chitomru. And when you say, Ma nochal b'shana hashvius, what are we going to eat in Shana Hashvius? Let's think about the geography. Eretz Yisrael wasn't an isolated island. If people know ahead of time that there's going to be a time when they're not going to be planting and harvesting, so you order food, you buy extra food, you store up from the countries around you. We know the borders of Shemitah, Chazal laid them out, so fill up with food. People say, yeah, we can do that, but it's not going to be Peres Eretz Yisrael. What are we going to do? He says, that's the beautiful question that they're asking. Right? So Hashem answers that yearning. He says, V'tzivisi es habracha. I'm going to enable you to have Peres Eretz Yisrael throughout. Okay? Now he says, what can people do when they don't have Peres Eretz Yisrael? He says, the eating of Shabbos, even in Chutz La'aretz, can have an aspect of this idea of the fruits of Eretz Yisrael. And he says, B'chutz La'aretz, you can connect yourself to Kedusha even when you're eating Chutz La'aretz fruit in there, that you don't forget Eretz Yisrael. You don't forget your connection to Eretz Yisrael. You don't forget what Eretz Yisrael is supposed to and is meant to be able to do with us and our produce, right? Then you're connected. Again, when Am Yisrael daven and they turn their noses toward Eretz Yisrael, toward Yerushalayim, that's not just nostalgia that we turn and give honor to our homeland, right? It's showing that we are tuned in, we're connected to Eretz Yisrael no matter where we are. Okay, this, I think I saw it was the Sfas Emes said, we see that Am Yisrael camped around the Mishkan in the Midbar, right? The different tribes camped around the Mishkan. When they came to Eretz Yisrael, each Shevet took their territory and the Aron took up its place in Yerushalayim. We got sent into Golus. He says, that's true. But by turning toward Eretz Yisrael and we're davening, we're showing we're still camped around the Beis HaMikdash. The perimeter of the camp got really, really big, right? But we're still in that circle. We're still there and we're still part of it and we're still connected. Okay, so this is what he says we could and should do with this. Tzaddikim gave great honor to the fruits of Eretz Yisrael. Like many things in life, when they're easily accessible to us, so we don't get excited about them. But the Kleismerger Rebbe said his father was the Rebbe of Rudnik, he was called. He had a bottle of olive oil from Eretz Yisrael. That was kept like in the special cabinet with the family silver and other valuable things. Shabbos morning, they would eat eggs and onions, and everybody would bring their plate, and he would put a tiny drop of the olive oil of Eretz Yisrael onto the eggs and onions. Right? And so it was many such stories of the value of these things. So we have to appreciate it, especially in approaching Chag HaBikurim, right? And to realize it's not that there are two sides. There's an agricultural holiday, Chag HaBikurim, right? And there's this spiritual holiday of Matan Torah, which is there. We have to realize that all those are supposed to go together, and especially Eretz Yisrael and the fruits of Eretz Yisrael are what join us up. Okay, have a wonderful evening, wonderful Shabbos.